please welcome to the stage Riley Kilburg, Executive Director, Center Ford, Clarence Anthony, CEO and Executive Director, National League of Cities, Francesca Ioffreda, Chief Innovation Officer, State of Maryland, and Liat Krawczyk, Executive Director, New Jersey AI Hub.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Riley Kilburg. I'm really excited to pivot into this conversation and talk about how state and local governments are beginning to use AI and digital tools to streamline services for small businesses. As we all know, we're in the really early stages of AI development, particularly as it relates to constituent services and understanding what's possible. I'm joined today by experts who will share emerging approaches, what's working and what's not, and discuss the policy choices that will determine if these efforts are really reducing friction, expanding access, and meeting the expectations of constituents. Let's start big picture with the panel. When it comes to the communities you serve, what are the pain points in your states and cities, and how are you thinking about addressing those? Liat, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. So I lead the New Jersey AI Hub, and just for some context, it's a public-private partnership. So I technically don't work for government, but it is an entity that was founded by the state of New Jersey, Princeton University, Microsoft, and CoreWeave. The four partners essentially started this entity as a means of thinking about how do you preemptively and proactively think about the investments you need to be making in the economy to make sure that we're ready for the future of what's coming. And so in terms of how I think about the pain points, I guess I'll go macroeconomic and then micro. In terms of the macroeconomic investments that we're making, we think about the life cycle of how AI evolves. So you have invention at the beginning, right? So like the invention of new AI models and new applications of AI. Innovation, which is the application of those inventions in a way that creates value. Then you have adoption, which is a lot of what we're talking about here today. And then you have social diffusion of like, how are all these things going to affect our economy? To me, adoption is the most important part of the equation for two reasons. One is, I think what's happening right now is you have a lot of emphasis on innovation and invention, right? Supply. And if you don't have adoption, what you're going to create is inflation of valuations. So all these companies are investing hundreds of billions of dollars in the economy in what is the assumption of adoption and demand is not catching up to that. So I think that could lead to an economic bubble. So that's on the supply side. And then if we don't have adoption, then in terms of diffusion, what you're going to see is continued economic concentration and inequality. And so in the macroeconomic level, focusing on workforce and how we're going to get every business on board to this moment, I think is the most important question for this time. In terms of the pain points we're seeing on the ground, I think it's businesses don't know what the use cases are, how to apply AI to those use cases, and we don't have a good way to get to those businesses in an effective manner. So I'll stop there.
Francesca?
Great. Well, maybe just to provide some context on what the innovation team is at the state of Maryland. So I joined a year ago to stand up this new innovation team within Governor Westmore's office. And our focus is innovation around economic mobility. And our team kind of sits at the intersection of data-driven insights, technology, human-centered design, and then kind of the ability to move quickly, prototype, and pilot new solutions. So we're meant to work in a cross-agency and cross-sector way to advance new approaches around economic mobility. And so why small business and how does that intersect with our office? As we looked at the data across the state, it immediately became clear that if we want to have impact at scale on economic mobility, we have to focus on small businesses. They make up 94% of all businesses within the state of Maryland. They're a huge job creator and they provide essential services in communities. So we knew that there was an angle from an ownership perspective, building wealth, from an employee perspective, helping to stabilize families and incomes, and then from a community perspective, making sure that those communities have the essential services. And so as we embarked on our journey to really understand what the pain points were, we met with over 200 small businesses across the state. And what immediately became clear were a few core challenges. One is limited access to capital, especially in low-income communities. We see, highly divergent capital flows in low-income versus higher-income communities. I think also business readiness was something we heard time and time again from entrepreneurs, and that spanned everything from financial literacy to how do I create a pro forma, really understanding what it takes to start, launch, scale a business. And then the third is knowledge and information challenges. Not having the information you need, whether that's on technology, AI adoption, state, local incentives that you might be eligible for, or being connected to the right people. So as an innovation team, being this multidisciplinary team that can move quickly, we've spun up kind of a series of projects related to each of those dimensions. So we're looking at increasing access to capital in low-income communities. We're trying to fortify benefits for small business employees, and we're working on a new community development tool to help shed light on areas where there is unmet demand and help the entrepreneurs understand how to build the capital stacks to launch their business. So looking forward to sharing more about that, but I think AI has an important role to play in so many of those solutions.
Great, thank you. Clarence, as you're talking to city leaders in cities across the country about some of their pain points, particularly as it connects to small business and government services, can you share some of the innovative ways that you've seen city leaders solve these problems?
Yep. First, I'd like to say that the National League of Cities is an organization that represents 19,000 cities, towns, and villages from New York down to a city of 500. And when you think about, and I want to put you in a mindset of the role of the elected officials and mayors, and the first thing I'm going to do is anoint everybody in the audience, even up here, as the mayor. So I want you to get in that mindset. And you're going to find that in every community, small cities and large cities, small businesses are the fastest growing area of growth in business in communities. Secondly, they have the opportunity to employ local folks in those communities from their neighborhoods and from throughout the community. And that's important if you were mayor and thinking of it that way. But there are challenges, because when you're a small business, the systems that you look at as mayor and city manager, they're complex to you. All you want to do is to open up your business, put out your open and welcome into my business flag. But there's process. There's permitting processes. There's the need to be able to provide a bond coverage. There are a lot of pain points in the complexity of doing business. There are cities throughout America that are putting out the welcome to my city sign. They're finding ways to streamline the permitting process to get your permit to do business. They're doing educational programs about how do you work with local governments. They're creating ecosystems where you work with the chamber, the destination associations within their communities. So I think if you were a mayor of a community, Riley, what you would clearly do is to create a table so that these small businesses would say, this is a community that I feel like I'd like to open up my company. I'd like to employ local skilled workers. And finally, I want to be able to create a community that everybody feels like they can be an entrepreneur.
I think we can all agree that local governments, small communities are really these incubators of innovation, and it's fun to watch, so I'm looking forward to hearing more of those stories today. Francesca, I want to come back to you. You are the Chief Innovation Officer of the state of Maryland, inside state government. You've got a mandate from the governor and the people to innovate there. Can you talk about one initiative you're working on, what the sort of issue is, how you're addressing it, what's actually happening there?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a tremendous privilege to work in Governor Moore's administration and to really have a mandate to be disruptive and to think about things in new ways to form partnerships. I'm actually going to talk about two initiatives, but quickly. So the first one on the initial pain point that I mentioned on access to capital, one of the things that our team did was launch something called the Maryland Community Investment Venture Fund. This was established in 2023 as part of the Access to Banking Act. Really, as we looked at the data, looked at the consolidation of the financial industry, what we see is that less people have access to capital and products and services that they need in low-income communities. So what this fund endeavors to do is to provide grant dollars to pilots between community banks and fintechs that are meeting the needs of low-income entrepreneurs. That could look like increased loan transparency. It could look like rethinking creditworthiness on the basis of things like utility payment. It could look like financial coaching. Many of those solutions are powered by AI. And I think what's so exciting about this is it tries to be a win-win for different constituencies, showing that Maryland is a place where innovation can happen and the state can be a catalyst for the community banks that are already serving small businesses and that really want to deepen the trust with those communities. It helps them better reach them through products and services that they want. For the entrepreneurs, they're getting the capital they need, and the fintechs are meeting their need. And then for the fintechs, they're getting access to customers. So I think it's a really exciting model from the analysis we've done. No other state is kind of taking the lead to bring this ecosystem together. We announced the launch in June. We had a demo day with 14 fintech finalists just last month, and now the banks and fintechs are having conversations. So looking forward to hopefully being able to announce the first tranche of pilots in the coming months. We know that that's just part of the equation. And so one of the other things that we are building is this community development platform. So as we looked at the data, we saw just huge gaps in essential services, both in quality and quantity of them, in low-income versus high-income communities. So think things like childcare and fresh food. We want to help close that gap, and we believe that small businesses are providing many of these services in our Maryland neighborhoods. And so what we're doing is really building this tool where you can see all the existing small businesses. We're starting with fresh food and childcare. You can see permitting, demographic, neighborhood level information. You can also, at an address level, understand, permitting, zoning, and what incentives you would qualify for. One of the things we hear from small businesses all the time is they don't know what sort of funding. They know funding is out there, but they don't know what they are eligible for. So helping to see it in one place. We're also using AI to bring in community voice, which I think is a really exciting use case. As we looked at neighborhoods, we saw that many of them have these neighborhood development plans where they say things like, we've been wanting a grocery store for 10 years. We need more childcare, but it lives in a PDF. And so using AI, we can scrape that information, digitize it, and overlay it on a tool. So you have this dynamic indicator of community voice. And so the development that you're actually building, it's being responsive to those community needs. And we're really excited. Have not launched the tool yet. We're in the process of building it, but we've been meeting with all the different stakeholders that we think the tool can serve. And ultimately, our belief is that it can help highlight where there's unmet demand and business opportunity. It can make it easier for the entrepreneurs to set up shop in the right place, to get the capital, and it's meeting the community need.
Great. I love to hear how all of that disruption is creating opportunity in the state of Maryland. Liat, you are building a different model in New Jersey. It's a public-private partnership, as you mentioned at the beginning, between the state, Princeton, Microsoft, and CoreWeave. Can you talk about some of the opportunities and the ways that you think this can help small business and sort of the model overall?
Sure. So the way I think about this is essentially, how do you meet every company where they are in their innovation journey, and how do you meet every individual where they are in their workforce journey? Essentially, what are the entry points and advancement avenues for anyone you meet to enter the AI ecosystem and to advance within it? So starting with the innovation side of the house, the first thing we're doing is focusing on how do you advance frontier R&D? What are the interinstitutional coalitions you need to build among research partners, both across industry and academia and business, to make sure that R&D is taking off in the most exciting ways, particularly because we're in the pharma corridor, thinking about future of health and also smart infrastructure and manufacturing, kind of the two sectors that happen to be based in New Jersey are also some of the sectors with the most exciting potential for discovery in AI. As part of that, smaller pharma companies, for example, could really benefit from some of these coalitions. For example, by thinking about what are the use cases where collective action across data sharing could really start to, and with an applied agentic AI lens, could really start to contribute to discovery. So for example, a lot of the rare disease platforms, are smaller platforms, but if we were to unite all of these platforms and take collective data and apply agentic AI discovery lens to it, could we come up with some of the cures for rare diseases? Then we talk about commercialization. So we're launching an accelerator, thinking about what are the unique elements of accelerators that you need to provide in an AI era. So things like, how do you create fractional AI engineering talent at a time where you don't have access to talent because private sector, large companies are absorbing that talent? And then on the workforce side, thinking about how do you support K-12 and higher ed with capacity building, both teacher training as well as working together on the hardest problems that they're currently working on. And for the small and medium businesses, really thinking about different models of how we get there. So the first thing we've been thinking about is how there's a lot, when I talk to people about what can we do for small business, they say, well, there's so many resources online. We know that small businesses, what you need is somebody working with you to implement those businesses. So could we train an army of people who might not be AI engineers, but are excellent at hands-on 5 to 10 use cases that small business operations require across the board? And can we deploy people for a year of service to work with small businesses? So that's some of the things that we're thinking about. Similarly, for medium-sized businesses, can we get the leadership of those medium-sized businesses to agree that this is a key priority? And then can we take tech teams that don't have an AI portfolio and put them in a cohort together to think about delivering their own set of projects that they want to deliver by X amount of date with a peer group that can work with them on making sure there's accountability and that there's someone to work with, because so many of these folks are doing it in isolation. So these are some of the things that we're thinking about, in addition to, of course, infrastructure like compute and data and the essentials to make this all work.
Clarence, are the state level innovations that we're hearing about in New Jersey and Maryland, are they reaching the cities that you work with, especially the smaller ones? Or is each city sort of reinventing the wheel for itself?
Well, first of all, I congratulate the governors of Maryland and New Jersey, because that's exactly what local governments need. We need a partner that really creates a statewide framework, but is flexible enough to be able to give the cities to design their own local niche, if you will. I think the previous speaker talked about one size does not fit all, because city size, infrastructure is different in each community. I would say that having the programs and the design and the frameworks by the state helps cities to be able to create tools that can work within their own communities. For example, the National League of Cities, we've created an AI dashboard that really helps cities nationally to go on our dashboard and be able to say, they're applying this tool, a procurement tool in this community, a public safety tool. How can that work in my community? And I think if we worked as the state and the federal as well as the local level, I think we could really do a lot of good for small businesses in our communities and nationally. But we have to remember that one size does not fit all. The ecosystem that works in one city or one state really may not apply in every state throughout America. But we need leadership at the state level.
I want to pivot now and talk a little bit about both trust and scaling and the adoption of some of these tools. I think small business owners have to know that they can trust these tools, but they also have to know that this is something that they can work with and scale over time. Clarence, I'm going to stick with you for a second. You know, we know that AI can make services faster and more seamless, but it raises issues of trust, of bias, and privacy. How are the NLC cities in your network thinking about responsible use, especially when these tools handle licensing, permitting, and financial data?
Yeah, I think that is an important question because I think all of us, the state and local level, when there's the adoption of anything new in the public sector, if it's successful, you're on the back page of a story. If it is not successful through a pilot, you're on the front page saying that you have not used public money in the right way. So it may be different in New Jersey and Maryland, but for mayors and local officials, there is some fiduciary responsibility of adopting new programs and policies and how you use them, and that word of trust. And at the local level, you know, we see each other at the grocery store, at church, at funerals, whatever you go to, they see you. So what we're seeing at the local level is some level of pause as there is this adoption of these new tools. I would sit here and tell you that everybody is jumping in as if it's safe in the water, but there is a sense of pause. But the creativity around minimizing the amount of permitting time. So if you get your permit in, you'll be able to plan that 10 days later you can get something out of the system. So there's some certainty that is being developed at the local level around the deployment and use of AI as it relates to helping small businesses get through the system quicker, get their licensing quicker, and then helping them to be able to be successful in those communities.
Let's talk scaling, and I'm watching the time, so I want to go through this one quickly. But what is the biggest barrier, and this is for all three of you, what is the biggest barrier to scaling these tools? If you could snap your fingers and make something easier to scale quicker, what would it be?
So I'd say two things. One is talent. We can't count, again, AI engineers, they're being absorbed by the large private companies. So how do we create the type of talent that is good enough to work with small businesses on very practical execution of what they need? That I think can happen. You know, this is like the great equalizer. If you do that well, you actually can bring up a lot of people. And instead of charging $900 to $2,000 an hour on consulting for AI, you can charge $200 an hour and have a great market that you're creating on the margins there. And the second thing I'd say is curation. I think like creating a one-stop shop where it's curated, high-quality materials, workshops that are very clear on here are the use cases, here's how you actually apply solutions. The amount of podcasts I listen to at the end of which I'm like, what? So what do you do? And like who is going to teach that well? And we have both a centralized space, a 6,500 square foot hub that hosts, you know, we'll be hosting something like 80 events a year that are very practical workshops, like no code, low code workshops and things like that, but also decentralization. So how do we bring that to industry associations, chambers of commerce and libraries so that geographically you're dispersing this type of knowledge as well?
Yeah, I want to double down on the talent piece. Clarence is absolutely right that there is inherent in government a risk aversion, and part of that is because it's built into the system. That being said, I think while Maryland and Governor Moore is pushing, you know, upskilling, reskilling, AI adoption within our state's workforce, we are still relatively nascent, especially compared to industry. So I think there is a real need to upskill, reskill, and help people understand the art of the possible. Saying adopt AI isn't enough. You have to meet people where they are and really coach and tailor them to use cases that help them understand how this technology can be used to reduce administrative burden, to better serve our residents, and do that in a risk-reward adjusted way. We are always calibrating, right? So an internal usage of AI might look different than one that is more resident-facing. So we have actually built an AI enablement team within the state to help figure out where are we piloting learning before we are scaling those AI use cases. But it all comes down to talent and people being able to use talent in a user-centric way.
I would say in the local government space, it's products and tools. We've not become a big enough market that the industry has designed enough tools for us to feel safe around adopting it because, again, we do things because we want to make our communities better. And so we're looking for piloted opportunities with our cities, not just in the procurement, not just in public safety, but in management, banking, making the community more accessible, transparency, all of those kinds of products we're looking for. And I think that that's been one of the barriers and pain points that we're trying to overcome, making the industry know that local governments are ready to partner.
So much to think about as we continue to look to innovating. As the three of you and everyone in this room thinks about our choices ahead, I had a question about design and deployment of AI, which I think you all just sort of covered a little bit, but I'm curious, if there's one thing you'd urge other leaders to think about in the next year, what would that be?
I'd say think about creating more entities like the AI Hub, because what happens is I think institutions are responsible for institutions. So schools are responsible for the people in their schools, not out-of-school youth, right? Companies are responsible for go-to-market for their product. There's no neutral third party that can direct resources thinking about the user. And I think that is like the type of structures that public-private academic partnerships can bring to the table that are distinct.
I'll go very micro. I think it's important to create spaces within your team, your organization, your community to be able to test and learn. So in my team, one of the things that we do is every week we have a roundtable where we go around and say, how have you used AI in a new way? And we're constantly experimenting with use cases, and we're demoing that live. I think until you actually have to get behind the computer and try it out, you just won't adopt it. And so I think the space to experiment and to question is something that we can all take with us each and every day, and that has cascading impacts.
I would just say simply prioritize AI infrastructure, because you focus on what you prioritize. The other point is we're all reading the stories about data centers, and everybody's trying to recruit one in local government. I'm just trying to ask our members to be more thoughtful and make sure you have the infrastructure in order to be able to carry out the needs of your community. That's my pause right now.
Great. We've covered so much today. I want to thank you all. I'm sure we could talk for hours and hours on this, but thank you all for joining us. Francesca, Liat, and Clarence, thank you so much. We look forward to continuing the conversation.